There is a rule in naval warfare you do not question. You do not send a slow, thin-skinned, underpowered escort carrier into a decisive fleet engagement. You do not pit converted cargo hulls against battleships with 18-inch guns. You do not expect flight decks made of soft steel and merchant marine engines to stand in the path of a nation's final, desperate naval counterstrike. For decades, every admiral, every strategist, every naval architect accepted this truth as unbreakable. Escort carriers were auxiliaries, rear echelon tools, convoy shepherds, submarine hunters, airplane ferries. They were never meant to fight capital ships, never meant to operate within range of an enemy battle line, never meant to decide the fate of an empire. Even their crews knew it. You knew it. Serve aboard a fleet carrier like Enterprise or Essex, and you walk the deck of a war machine. Serve aboard an escort carrier like Gambier Bay, Kalinin Bay, or Fanshawe Bay, and you served on what sailors grimly called jeep carriers, cardboard flat tops, or simply toys. Because that is what the world believed they were. They were slow. They were fragile. They carried barely 28 planes instead of 90. Their engines struggled to push 19 knots if the sea cooperated. Their armor barely stopped shrapnel. Their defensive guns were few. Their tiny air groups lacked the weight to hit hardened naval targets, and the Japanese Navy knew every one of these weaknesses. That is why, in 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy viewed the sudden appearance of escort carriers near Leyte Gulf as a gift, an opportunity, a moment of weakness exposed by American overconfidence. After years of losing carriers, pilots, planes, and fuel, here was the chance to strike something the U.S. could not defend, the small, soft center of its Philippine invasion force. Japan believed these toy carriers could not respond in time, could not launch enough aircraft, could not escape the reach of battleships and cruisers designed to obliterate faster, stronger opponents. Japan saw them as prey. But in October 1944, one moment shattered every assumption they held. Because on the morning of October 25, when the largest surface fleet Japan had left surged down the narrow throat of San Bernardino Strait, expecting to find helpless targets, they instead found something else. They found men who refused to run. They found aircrews who launched without fuel, without bombs, without orders. They found destroyers that charged into gunfire they could not survive. And they found escort carriers that fought like fleet carriers, clawing at the sky with every plane they could get airborne. But they also found one man, one commander who would change everything. His name was Ernest E. Evans, 41 years old, half Cherokee, half Irish. A destroyer skipper with a reputation for fearlessness that bordered on reckless. A man who once told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way." And on that morning, he would make good on every syllable. Because the rule of naval warfare was about to break. The rule that said escort carriers could not fight battleships. The rule that destroyers could not charge cruisers. The rule that slow, fragile ships could not stand against the last great strike of the Imperial Japanese Navy. At 6:47 hours, the lookouts aboard Johnston spotted the impossible, towering pagoda masts, miles long, bearing down on Taffy 3, the small U.S. task unit of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, a force of 13 American ships, facing 23 Japanese warships, including the battleships Yamato, Nagato, Haruna, and Kongo. The guns on those ships reached ranges of over 40,000 yards. The escort carriers could barely reach 19 knots. That morning, by every rule of naval warfare, the Americans should have been annihilated. But rules mean nothing when the men who must obey them refuse to. Evans stands on his tiny bridge, wind cutting across the deck as the enormity of the situation hits him. The carriers behind him, Gambier Bay, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, Fanshawe Bay, Kitkun Bay, and St. Lo, are sitting ducks. They cannot outrun 30-knot cruisers. They cannot withstand 18-inch shells. They cannot afford even one mistake. He knows exactly what must happen. Destroyers will have to shield them. Torpedo attacks will have to drive off battleships. Aircrew will have to launch instantly, every plane, every pilot, no matter their loadout. And Taffy 3 will have to fight a battle it cannot win, just long enough that more lives might be saved. Evans takes in all of this in a matter of seconds. The sea, the distance, the sunrise behind the enemy fleet, the terrifying scale of the force approaching. And he decides without hesitation that rule or no rule, impossible or not, the escort carriers under his care will not die undefended. You can almost hear him breathe out one final time before giving the order that will define his legacy. General quarters, all hands to battle stations. A rule is about to break. A nation's naval power is about to collapse. And it will happen because the smallest, weakest carriers in the U.S. Navy, the ones mocked as toys, are about to fight with the fury of an entire fleet. And at the center of it stands Ernest Evans. You stand on the bridge of USS Johnston, spray breaking across the bow, the low growl of engines vibrating beneath your feet. The sun is just beginning to rise, casting a gold band across the Philippine Sea, when the first shapes appear on the horizon, dark, towering silhouettes that do not belong here. And neither does your small task unit. Taffy 3 was never meant to fight a fleet. It was built for air support, anti-submarine patrols, and protecting troop landings. 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts, not a single heavy ship among them. Yet here they are, facing the most powerful surface force Japan has left. At the center of this impossible confrontation stands Ernest Edwin Evans, 41 years old, born near Pawnee, Oklahoma. Half Cherokee, raised with a deep sense of duty and a refusal to flinch from danger. His sailors know him as a man who stands exposed on deck during gunnery practice so he can see the fall of shot with his own eyes. A man who once took a destroyer through a tropical storm rather than break off a patrol. A man who tells the truth plainly, even when it scares people. He is not polished, not political, not interested in reputation. He is interested in fighting. From the moment he took command of Johnston, he warned the crew, this is going to be a fighting ship, not a scout, not a messenger, a ship that moves toward gunfire, not away from it. It is that mindset, instilled over months of drills, discipline, and relentless expectations, that now stands between Taffy 3 and certain destruction. Because the Japanese center force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita is not a rumor anymore. It is not an intelligence estimate. It is not a distant threat. It is here. 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, 11 destroyers, close enough that you can identify the sun glinting off pagoda masts, the shape of triple gun turrets, the unmistakable bulk of Yamato, the biggest battleship ever built. Against this, Taffy 3 has barely 28 planes per carrier, aircraft loaded for ground support, not ship killing. Some are armed with depth charges. Some with tiny 100-pound bombs. Some carry nothing but machine guns. And the carriers themselves. Each is barely the length of Yamato's main battery range. You can feel the tension sweeping through every ship in the task group. On Kalinan Bay, pilots sprint for their aircraft. On Gambier Bay, sailors rush to position ammunition they never expected to fire. On the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, men stare in disbelief at the sight of battleships they had only seen in recognition manuals. But Evans does not freeze. He does not ask questions. He does not wait for orders. He knows what is at stake, because Leyte Gulf is not just another operation. It is the gateway to the liberation of the Philippines. It is the return of General MacArthur. It is the cutting of Japan's southern resource lines. It is the collapse of their last hope for a defensive perimeter. If Kurita breaks through Taffy 3, he can reach the vulnerable landing forces at Leyte. He can massacre transport ships, fuel barges, ammunition carriers, troop convoys. He can inflict a strategic catastrophe the United States has not faced since Pearl Harbor, One Japanese breakthrough could unravel everything. Evans understands this better than anyone, and he understands something else. No one else is coming. The nearest American battleships are hundreds of miles away. Halsey's fast carriers are chasing a decoy force to the north. The sea between Taffy 3 and friendly heavy ships is empty. This small, fragile unit stands alone. You watch Evans move across the bridge, issuing rapid orders with the calmness of a man who has already accepted the price. He calls for speed, flank speed, all boilers online, though Johnston was never built for a sprint. He orders smoke. He orders readiness. He orders his gunners to stand by for a target solution. Then he picks up the phone to the engine room, his voice firm and steady. All engines ahead flank. If we're going out fast. The crew hears the steel in his voice. The resolve, the absolute lack of hesitation. And something happens, something intangible but unmistakable. Fear turns into purpose. Confusion turns into action. Uncertainty turns into trust. Because when a leader chooses the fight before anyone else fully understands the danger, that conviction becomes contagious. The carriers begin launching planes, half-prepped, half-fueled, some without ordnance, because buying even minutes matters. Deck crews push aircraft into position in a frantic but disciplined ballet. Engines roar. Wings unfold. Pilots are told, go, just go. Anything you can do helps. And even before the first wave lifts off, Evans sees the shape of the battle forming. The carriers cannot escape unless the Japanese fleet is slowed. The Japanese fleet cannot be slowed without torpedoes. And only the destroyers and destroyer escorts of Taffy 3 carry torpedoes powerful enough to threaten cruisers and battleships. That means Johnston. That means Hull. That means Heermann. That means men with no armor and no margin for error must step into the path of the heaviest guns afloat. Evans knows what this will cost. He does not care. His duty is clear. So as the horizon fills with muzzle flashes and the first 18-inch shells scream overhead at Mach 2, he does not retreat. He gives the order that will launch the most improbable defensive attack in naval history. Torpedo attack, full speed, all ahead. The crew looks at one another as the meaning sinks in. Evans is not maneuvering defensively. Evans is not withdrawing behind the carriers. Evans is charging straight at the Japanese fleet. You feel the destroyer surge forward, engine straining, the bow slicing through growing whitecaps as the ship accelerates toward an enemy 15 times its size. This is no longer strategy, no longer assumption, no longer rule. This is a man making a choice that should be impossible. And the entire battle off Samar is about to ignite because of it. The bow of Johnston rises and falls through the swells as the ship accelerates, engines screaming at the limits of their design. You can feel the vibration running through the deck plates, through your boots, through your chest. The destroyer is pushing 34 knots, far beyond what the manuals say she should ever attempt. Ahead of you, the Japanese battle line stretches across the horizon. 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, 11 destroyers, and 1 destroyer. Charging them alone, Evans stands unprotected on the exposed wing of the bridge, wind tearing at his hair, binoculars fixed on the nearest cruiser, Kumano. Range, 18,000 yards. The flashes of her 8-inch guns flicker like distant lightning. A heartbeat later, the shells arrive. Columns of water erupt around Johnston, towering geysers that crash down with the force of a hammer. You hear the shriek, an unearthly metallic howl, as another salvo screams overhead at nearly 2,500 feet per second. Still, Evans does not flinch. Left full rudder, bring us in closer. Johnston arcs toward the enemy, closing the distance by the second. 17,000 yards, 15,500, 14,000. The Japanese cannot understand what they are seeing. From the bridge of Yamato herself, officers stare in disbelief. One destroyer, just one, is charging directly at a fleet that could flatten a city. They believe it must be a mistake, a malfunction, a ship out of control. Then Johnston opens fire. Her 5-inch 38 guns hammer the morning air, firing at their maximum rate, 15 rounds per minute. The forward turret belts out shells that streak toward Kumano, slamming into her superstructure, shattering rangefinders, peppering decks with shrapnel. It is not enough to stop a cruiser, but it is enough to blind her, enough to disrupt her fire, enough to force her gunners to adjust. Evans sees the effect instantly. Closer, close the range. 13,000 yards, 12,000, 11,000. Enemy shells tear through the sky like ripping bedsheets. One slams into Johnston's number 1 engine room. The ship shudders, lights flicker. Men are thrown off their feet. A report comes through. Engine 2 offline, speed dropping. Evans refuses to accept it. Get it back online. I don't care how. The order is not a suggestion, it is a promise. The engine crew knows it. They work in darkness, steam hissing around them, adrenaline overriding fear as they get the turbines breathing again. Speed climbs back 27 knots, 29:31. And still Johnston closes in, 10,000 yards, 9,500, 9,000. This is torpedo range. Evans grips the voice tube. All ahead full, stand by torpedoes, prepare to fire. The torpedo crew braces themselves. Sweat beads on foreheads. Hands tense around firing mechanisms. They know what this means. They know that once the torpedoes leave their tubes, the Johnston will be naked, no surprise left, no tricks remaining. They also know this is the only way the carriers will survive. 8,000 yards. Shells crash around the ship again. One slams into the aft deck, ripping open steel, sending fragments slicing through exposed men. Another tears into a 5-inch mount, killing several gunners instantly. Evans does not break. 7,000 yards. This is suicidal range. This is the moment a rational commander turns away. Evans turns toward it. Fire torpedoes, the order echoes across the destroyer. 5 Mark 15 torpedoes roar from their mounts, white wakes slicing the sea as they streak toward Kumano. Seconds pass. Then a column of water erupts beneath Kumano's bow. The cruiser shudders violently. Entire forward section, hundreds of tons of steel, is blown open. Fires leap skyward. She veers out of formation, nearly colliding with Suzuya. One U.S. destroyer has just crippled a Japanese heavy cruiser. And for a brief electric moment, you feel the unthinkable. This might actually work. Evans sees it too. He sees an entire Japanese battle formation thrown off balance by one attack. He sees confusion rip through their decks. He sees opportunity. But opportunity comes with a price. Because Johnston is now well within the sights of every enemy gun. The battleship Haruna pivots her 14-inch turrets. The cruiser Chikuma brings all 9 8-inch guns to bear. The destroyers Noaki and Kishinami accelerate to cut off your retreat. Hard right rudder, Evans shouts. Johnston heaves over, turning violently as the first salvo slams in. A shell tears through the forward deck. Another rips open the port side, flooding compartments. A third explodes near the bridge, blasting shrapnel across the superstructure. Men bleed. Steel groans. Smoke fills the air, but the destroyer keeps moving. Evans grips the rail to steady himself as the deck heaves. We're not done yet. Bring us about. Re-engage. He orders Johnston directly back into the fight, toward 2 cruisers and an entire Japanese destroyer screen. You are now watching a single American destroyer duel against multiple warships simultaneously. The gunners fire until their barrels smoke. Shell casings pile at their feet. The ship rocks with every recoil. Navigators shout ranges. Spotters call corrections. Damage control races to plug holes the size of cattle troughs. But as the chaos rages, a message crackles over the radio, one that turns impossible into urgent. Enemy battleships closing on the carriers. We need cover. The carriers, the heart of Taffy 3. The last chance for the landings at Leyte. They are still exposed, still running. Still within range of the Japanese main guns. And Johnston is the only ship close enough to buy precious minutes. Evans hears the plea. He does not pause. He does not consider losses. He gives a single steady command. Come about again, course 140, maximum speed, we're going back in. The crew stares in disbelief. They have already charged the Japanese fleet once. They have already taken crippling hits. They have already lost men. Now they are turning for another attack. And as Johnston swings toward the enemy again, you hear the roar of approaching American aircraft. Wildcats, Hellcats, Avengers scrambling into the fight with whatever they had left. Some carry bombs. Some carry depth charges. Some carry nothing but their courage. One pilot shouts into the radio, "We're making a run, but this is suicide." If you find this kind of forgotten history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of courage and sacrifice deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. Above you, the sky fills with American planes diving, strafing, harassing. Ahead of you, the sea fills with Japanese ships firing relentlessly. And in the middle, a single destroyer turns once more into a battle she cannot win. And the next moment, the next impossible act, will define naval history. Johnston's deck is slick with seawater, oil, and blood as she lunges back toward the Japanese line. Her forward guns thunder again, sending 55-pound shells arching toward Chikuma, the cruiser now closing fast on the fleeing American carriers. The air smells of cordite, burning insulation, and the sharp metallic tang of ruptured steel. Evans braces himself against the wind on the ruined bridge wing, scanning the horizon for threats. He does not have to wait long. 8-inch shells from Chikuma detonate a few ship lengths away, one after another, each concussion rattling teeth and bones. The cruiser's gunners have recalibrated, locked in, determined to swat this mosquito that dares challenge them. Right full rudder, give me everything. The wheel turns, the ship lurches. A salvo whistles past where the Johnston would have been moments earlier. Still, the destroyer closes in. 8,000 yards, 7,500. 7,000. The range is shrinking dangerously, but Evans knows this is where his ship excels. The 5-inch guns fire faster than any Japanese turret. Rate of fire becomes its own kind of armor. Below decks, damage control parties push through knee-deep water to reach ruptured pipes. They work by flashlight in a haze of smoke. Pumps thunder. Men cough on fumes. Still they fight because the ship is still alive and Evans still needs her. Above, the gunners keep firing. Another shell lands on Chikuma's stern. Then another. A plume of flame erupts from her rear turret. She begins to turn away, bleeding speed, throwing spray as fire climbs her deckhouses. But Chikuma is not alone. To the south, the cruiser Tone angles in for a flanking shot. To the north, Congo's 14-inch guns boom, each muzzle blast visible even from miles away. And behind them all, the shadow of Yamato looms. Her 18.1-inch guns traverse slowly, like great beasts waking from slumber. A single hit from one of those shells would obliterate Johnston, not damage, not cripple, but erase her. Evans sees the danger. He knows he is exposed. He knows every second spent engaging cruisers is a second Yamato's gunners need to lock their trajectory. But he also knows that turning away now means giving the cruisers a clear path to the escort carriers. He makes the only decision he can. Maintain course, keep firing. The crew obeys without hesitation. Gunners shout corrections. Up 2. Left 4. Shells arc toward Tone, smashing into her forward hull plating. The ship begins to list slightly, one turret going quiet, but the Japanese respond with a storm. A salvo from Congo lands close aboard, close enough that the explosion lifts Johnston partly out of the water. Men are thrown through bulkheads. Equipment crashes against walls. One of the forward 5-inch mounts jams. And then you hear it, a sharp, metallic shriek followed by a deafening boom. An 8-inch shell from Chikuma slams into Johnston's superstructure, tearing through the communications center, shredding antennas and radio equipment. The bridge shakes. Electrical panels burst into flame. Evans grips a railing, steadying himself. "Reports," he shouts. "We've lost radar, fire control radar down." Another voice. "Primary radio destroyed." Another. Steering damaged, manual control engaged. Piece by piece, Johnston is being torn apart, but the ship is not done. Evans wipes the blood from his forehead. He does not even remember getting hit and leans toward his helmsman. "Keep us in the fight. As long as we're afloat, we're attacking." Those words travel through the ship like a spark. Gunners redouble their efforts. Ammunition handlers run faster. Damage control teams push deeper into smoke-filled compartments. And as the battle intensifies, a voice crackles over the emergency backup radio, faint but unmistakable. "Hold to Johnston, we're making a torpedo run." Evans cannot help but smile grimly. The other destroyers are joining the impossible. From the west, Hull appears, already riddled with holes flooding badly. But she charges the Japanese battleships at point-blank range. She fires a spread of torpedoes that force Yamato to turn away, temporarily removing the world's largest battleship from the fight. Moments later, Heermann charges Nagato and two cruisers simultaneously, an act so reckless the Japanese assume she must be part of a much larger force. But even with their heroic contributions, the cruisers remain dangerously close to the escort carriers, and Johnston is the only ship left in position to intervene. Evans points at Chikuma, now only 6,000 yards away. "Target that cruiser, pour it into her." Johnston's gunners obey. Shell after shell slams into Chikuma. Smoke pours from her hangar. One engine goes dead. Her rudder jams. She begins to limp north, directly into the path of incoming American aircraft. Moments later, bombs strike her decks. Torpedoes hit her hull. The combined force of Johnston and the air group finishes what neither could accomplish alone. Chikuma is sinking. Another threat removed, but there is no time to celebrate. Because Tone, Chikuma's sister ship, now turns her full attention toward Johnston. Her guns, undamaged, find the range quickly. A salvo lands. One shell crashes into the aft magazine area, but mercifully the magazine does not ignite. Another smashes through the secondary deck, starting a fire that races along electrical cables. And then a shell tears through the port side, shredding plumbing, rupturing steam lines, and blasting scalding vapor through multiple compartments. Men scream, metal shrieks, the ship keels slightly. Engine 1 out, speed dropping to 17 knots. Evans does not raise his voice. "Get us whatever speed you can. Helm, bring us about again, course 160. We're screening the carriers." It is madness. It is brilliance. It is duty. And as Johnston turns yet again, wounded, burning, half-disabled, you suddenly hear something strange, cheers from above. American pilots in the air are watching the destroyer's repeated charges, disbelief turning into awe. One pilot radios, "That destroyer is alone down there, and she's taking on the whole fleet." Another adds, "Whoever's driving that ship is the bravest man alive." But the fight is far from over. Because just as Johnston steadies on her new course, another threat appears. The Japanese destroyer Noaki closes to just 10,000 yards, perfect range to finish the wounded American ship. Evans turns to his gunners. "All right, let's make this one count." Johnston fires first. 5-inch shells streak across the water, slamming into Noaki's forward deck, smashing her torpedo mounts, rupturing fuel lines. Noaki turns away, smoking heavily, withdrawing from the fight. Another enemy driven off. But the cost is growing. Fires spread. Flooding increases. Ammunition runs low. And then with radios failing and the ship slowing, Evans hears a desperate plea from Gambier Bay, the closest escort carrier. "We're taking hits. Cruisers closing, God help us." Gambier Bay is slowing, listing, breaking apart under concentrated fire. Evans knows what this means. The battle is shifting to its final, desperate act, and Johnston is running out of time, power, and blood. The sea around Gambier Bay churns with shell splashes as the escort carrier struggles to flee. She is the slowest of Taffy 3's carriers, barely capable of 17 knots on a good day, and today she has no chance. The cruisers Chikuma, Tone, and Haguro close in from the northwest, their 8-inch guns firing relentlessly. Every salvo inches closer. Every hit slows her more. Clouds of smoke trail from her stern as she desperately launches more aircraft, anything with wings to keep the Japanese at bay. Evans watches it happen from the battered bridge of Johnston. His ship is barely alive. She is flooding, burning, her forward guns jammed, her aft guns running low on ammunition. She has lost radar, lost communications, lost maneuverability, but she has not lost her will, and neither has her captain. "We're going in," Evans says calmly. His exhausted crew stares at him. They have already charged the Japanese fleet 3 times. They have already taken dozens of hits. They have already done the impossible. Now he wants a 4th charge. He points toward Gambier Bay. She's dying out there, and we're the only ones close enough to help. Even if we can't save her, we give her every second we can. That is all he needs to say. Every man on the bridge responds at once. "Helm, bring us northwest." "Engine room, we need whatever speed you have left." "Gunnery, target the cruisers." Johnston limps toward the enemy. Not at 34 knots, not at 30, barely at 17, but she moves, and as long as she moves, she fights. Ahead, the sky is filled with American aircraft diving and firing in desperate, fuel-starved attacks. Pilots with empty bomb racks make strafing runs just to harass the enemy. One Avenger pilot drops a depth charge because it is the only ordnance he has left. Another dives without firing, just to distract a cruiser's gunners long enough to miss. Every second matters, and Johnston is adding seconds. Her 2 remaining operational guns open fire again, the barrels now visibly scorched. The forward mount fires manually, aimed by sailors using their eyes instead of radar or computer guidance. Several shells crash into Haguro's superstructure, knocking out a range finder and starting fires along her upper deck. The Japanese formation, already rattled by the destroyer's earlier attacks, now faces an American ship they believed they had already destroyed. But Gambier Bay cannot hold on forever. A massive shell from Chikuma lands a direct hit amidships. The carrier begins to slow to 14 knots, then 12, then 9. Fires burn unchecked across her flight deck. Pilots scream for her to turn into the wind, but she cannot. Then comes the final blow. A shell penetrates below the waterline, floods her forward compartments, and she begins to list sharply to port. Evans sees the inevitable. He does not retreat. He orders one more attack run. "Bring us in, close as you can." It is not enough to save her, but it is enough to make the enemy pay. Johnston's gunners fire until their tubes glow red. They hit Chikuma again and again, forcing her to swerve and lose targeting. American aircraft swoop in for more hits, machine gun bursts peppering her decks, bombs striking her stern. In this chaos, Gambier Bay's crew abandon ship. The carrier rolls slowly, then capsizes, her flight deck slipping beneath the waves. Men swim for rafts as Japanese shells detonate around them. Evans watches, jaw clenched. He has done everything a man could do, but the battle is far from over. Because another Japanese cruiser has slipped past the melee and now bears down directly on the remaining escort carriers. The carriers, Fanshawe Bay, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, Kitkun Bay, and St. Lo, are still launching aircraft, still turning frantically, still fighting for their lives. And behind them, another threat grows, Japanese destroyers forming up for a torpedo run. Evans reacts instantly. "We've got to draw their fire. Come about hard to port," the helm answers. The ship groans as she swings, but the once quick destroyer now feels sluggish, her wounds slowing her response. A report comes from below. "Captain, steering is failing. Manual controls only. We've lost pressure on the starboard line." Evans speaks through clenched teeth. "Do whatever you can, just keep us pointed at the enemy." Then the Japanese destroyers open fire. Shells smash into Johnston's midsection. One strikes the engine room directly, knocking out both turbines. The destroyer shudders to a halt, dead in the water. For the first time all morning, she is no longer charging forward. She is vulnerable. Smoke blankets the deck. Flames flicker around shattered bulkheads. Ammunition cooks off sporadically, sending sharp cracks through the air. The list to port grows 7 degrees, then 9. The executive officer reports, "Captain, we're losing power to the pumps." Evans nods slowly. He knows what this means. A ship without pumps is a ship sinking. But he is not done fighting. He grips the bridge rail and shouts, "Gunnery, keep firing. As long as those guns can shoot, we're in this fight." His men obey. The last operational 5-inch gun fires manually, aimed by sight alone, smoke and flame blowing across the deck with each shot. The rounds slam into Haguro's bow, smashing through plating and throwing up clouds of debris. The Japanese cannot believe what they are seeing. A ship with no engines is still attacking them, but the cost is brutal. A destroyer from the Japanese screen, Yukikaze, fires a full salvo. One hit tears into Johnston's stern, killing dozens. Another rips across the bow, throwing metal fragments like shrapnel. A final 8-inch shell crashes into the bridge. The blast throws Evans to the deck. Blood runs down his left side. His uniform is shredded. His face is burned. He struggles to stand, leaning on a railing twisted by the force of the explosion. The bridge crew gathers around him. "Captain, you're wounded. You need medical help." Evans shakes his head. "I'll get treatment when everyone else is taken care of." He waves off assistance, steadies himself, and gives his final combat order. "All hands prepare to abandon ship." The words cut through the ship like a blade, but the crew knows it is the only option left. The pumps are dead. The ship is listing 15 degrees. Fires rage uncontrollably. Ammunition is nearly depleted. Yet even as men rush to lifelines, rafts, and float nets, the aft gun fires again. One last defiant shot toward the Japanese fleet. Evans watches it go, smoke drifting past him. A wounded, sinking ship firing into an enemy armada. It is the purest expression of what this morning has become. And in that instant, just as Johnston begins her final roll, messages crackle across the emergency frequencies from American pilots overhead. "Destroyer down there is still shooting. She's sinking, but she's still firing. My God, what a ship!" Men in the air, men who owe their escape to this burning hulk, witness her final minutes with reverence. And below, in the water, the crew waits to see if their captain will join them. Evans turns toward the rail. He grabs one last wounded sailor by the collar and throws him overboard to safety. Only then does he leap. He disappears into the sea as Johnston rolls onto her side, her hull rising above the waves one final time before slipping beneath the surface at 10:10 a.m. The battle is not over. Japan's fleet still advances. Taffy 3 is still fighting for its life. But the loss of Johnston marks the turning point. Because in the next hour, something extraordinary happens, something the Japanese never expected. Their massive fleet begins to retreat. And the ripple effect of Evans' courage will shock the entire world. The ocean is littered with oil slicks, burning debris, and hundreds of men struggling to stay afloat as the battle rages on. Above them, American aircraft continue to dive, strafe, and harass the Japanese fleet. Squadrons of Wildcats and Avengers flying sorties with nothing but machine guns, empty bomb racks, and fuel gauges dropping toward zero. But something is changing. The Japanese fleet, Kurita's massive center force, is losing momentum. Not because they lack firepower, not because they lack ships, but because they no longer understand what they are facing. From the bridge of Yamato, confusion spreads like a fog. The flagship's officers report multiple American destroyers attacking from different angles. They report dozens of aircraft diving again and again, as if from a full-sized carrier group. They report torpedo attacks so frequent and so aggressive that Kurita begins to assume he has stumbled into the main American fleet. He has not. He is fighting 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. But the ferocity of the defense, led by Evans and amplified by every ship of Taffy 3, has created an illusion of overwhelming American strength. What the Japanese do not know is that nearly every U.S. ship is either damaged, out of ammunition, or fleeing at maximum speed. What they do know is that every time they focus their guns on a carrier, another destroyer appears through the smoke. Every time they set up a firing solution, another wave of American planes screams down from the sky. And the psychological effect is catastrophic. Kurita sees chaos where there is none. He sees traps where there are none. He sees American forces reinforcing the battle, when in truth, Taffy 3 is alone. Conflicting reports flood his flagship, new carriers approaching from the east, destroyers massing to the west. Air attacks increasing must be the main fleet. None of it is accurate, but to a commander already misled by earlier American deception operations, the picture becomes overwhelming. Kurita hesitates. His ships have suffered grievous wounds. Kumano is crippled. Chikuma is sinking. Tone is damaged. Multiple destroyers have been hit, and Yamato, the pride of the Imperial Navy, has been forced to turn away from torpedo attacks more than once. This is not the victory he imagined when he plunged through San Bernardino Strait. His mission was to attack American transports and landing craft, not to fight a running battle against a phantom fleet. Meanwhile, Taffy 3 fights on. Heermann, the last surviving destroyer with operational engines, makes another torpedo run, charging Nagato, Kongo, and Yamato simultaneously. Shells rain around her, but she presses the attack. Her torpedoes miss, but her courage forces the battleships to turn again. The destroyer escorts Samuel B. Roberts, the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship, duels the cruiser Chaka at a range so close that the overshooting 8-inch shells fly over her and explode harmlessly beyond. The carriers themselves, built to flee, not fight, begin firing their own 5-inch guns, pelting Japanese cruisers with defensive fire. And every plane they launch, even unarmed ones, circles back to make harassment runs. One Avenger pilot, out of fuel and ammunition, simply dives at Yamato until she turns away from the escort carriers to avoid a perceived attack. Chaos deepens. By 9-10 hours, Kurita receives another report. Enemy carriers sighted to the southeast. There are no such carriers, but he cannot ignore the possibility. Then, at 9:20 hours, he learns that his cruisers are scattered or crippled, his destroyers disorganized, and his battleships low on fuel from repeated evasive maneuvers. And now American aircraft, real ones from real fleet carriers, are being reported inbound from the east. Kurita reaches a moment of decision. He scans the sea, a sea that should have belonged to Japan, a sea where victory should have been inevitable. Instead, he sees smoke, wreckage, ships burning, half his heavy cruisers crippled, battleships forced off course, a formation completely out of alignment, and all of this inflicted by the weakest U.S. naval unit in the area. He finally concludes the unthinkable. This is a trap. He believes he is facing Halsey's full Third Fleet. He believes more U.S. carriers are moments from striking. He believes that continuing forward risks destroying what remains of Japan's surface navy. He does not know the truth. The only thing stopping him is Taffy 3, a handful of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts, men armed with courage instead of armor, men who fought far beyond their ship's design. At 9:45 hours, Kurita gives the order no Japanese officer expects. All ships, reverse course. Withdraw. Shock ripples through the fleet. From Yamato's bridge officers, from cruiser captains who believed they were about to finish off the American carriers, from destroyer commanders whose torpedoes were already prepared. But the order stands, and the largest surface fleet Japan has left, the force meant to annihilate American lines, wreck Leyte operations, and turn the tide of the war, turns away. Not because of heavy U.S. artillery, not because of overwhelming American numbers, but because a tiny, fragile escort carrier group refused to die quietly. The ripple effects begin immediately. Enemy guns fall silent. Shell splashes stop rising around Taffy 3. The remaining escort carriers limp southward, still burning but alive. American pilots who had been preparing for final suicide attacks suddenly find no targets. On ships across Taffy 3, men stare in disbelief. The enemy is leaving. They do not understand it. They cannot believe it. They assume reinforcements must be arriving. They are wrong. It was their stand, it was Evans' stand that broke the back of the attack. And only now, only as the Japanese fleet recedes, does the scale of what they accomplished begin to come into focus. Because what they didn't know was this: Taffy 3, by refusing to yield, saved the entire Leyte landing force, over 200,000 soldiers and hundreds of ships, from annihilation. The true impact would not be understood until after the war. But in this moment, one truth becomes clear. A toy escort carrier group halted Japan's last chance at naval victory. And their stand reshaped the Pacific War forever. When the guns finally fall silent and the Japanese fleet vanishes into the northern haze, the men of Taffy 3 are left with a sight they will never forget. A calm sea, burning wreckage, oil slicks stretching for miles, and the voices of their own shipmates calling for help from the water. The cost of their stand now becomes painfully clear. Hull is gone. Samuel B. Roberts is gone. Gambier Bay is gone. And Johnston, the first to charge, the last to fall, is gone. But Japan's last bid to crush the American landings at Leyte has failed because of them. Rescue operations begin immediately. Escort carriers slow to pick up men. Destroyer escorts, damaged but afloat, drop nets and rope ladders into the water. Pilots circle overhead to guide rescuers toward survivors drifting on rafts, debris, or life jackets. The sea is strangely peaceful compared to the hell of the morning. Yet scattered across this expanse are men who fought like lions, men now shivering, burned, bleeding, and clinging to anything that floats. Among them are many of Evans' sailors. They recall how their captain threw wounded men off the ship to safety, how he refused to abandon his post until everyone else was clear, how he leaped only when the destroyer rolled beneath him. Some saw him in the water, some swam near him, some heard his voice as he encouraged men to stay together. But Ernest Edwin Evans is never seen again. He simply disappears into the sea. He was 41 years old. One of his chiefs later said, "The skipper went down with the ship because that was the only thing left he could do for us." For days, survivors drift. Many die of wounds, exposure, or exhaustion. Yet hundreds are eventually rescued, living testimony to the courage of a destroyer captain who defied fear, fire, and every rule of naval warfare. As news of the battle reaches American command, shock ripples outward. How could a tiny force, escort carriers that the Navy itself often overlooked, stand toe-to-toe with battleships and cruisers? How could 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts frighten the massive center force into retreat? How could pilots with no bombs drive away the greatest battleship ever built? The story spreads quickly. Taffy 3 fought the battle they were never meant to fight, and they won. Then the deeper realization sets in. Had Kurita broken through and reached the American transports, the invasion force of 200,000 men could have been devastated. Supply lines crippled. Entire brigades stranded without ammunition, fuel, or reinforcements. Leyte could have become a catastrophe. The liberation of the Philippines might have stalled. The Pacific War itself could have been delayed by months, possibly years. But instead, because of a group of toy carriers and the destroyers guarding them, Japan's last chance to alter the course of the conflict died in the waters off Samar. It is one of the most dramatic strategic reversals in modern naval history, and it emerges from the actions of men whose names few outside the Navy knew in 1944. Men like Lieutenant Robert Copeland of Samuel B. Roberts, who led a destroyer escort into a gun duel with a heavy cruiser. Commander William Dow Thomas of Hull, who charged Yamato knowing he would not return. Lieutenant Commander Amos Hathaway, damage control officer aboard Kalinin Bay, who kept a burning carrier afloat. And dozens of pilots, many flying unarmed, who dove fearlessly at ships 3 times their size. But one name rises above all others: Commander Ernest E. Evans. In May 1945, he is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the first Native American in the U.S. Navy to receive it. The citation describes how he unhesitatingly placed his ship between the enemy and his carriers, how he fought until the Johnston sank beneath him, and how his actions contributed to turning back an overwhelming enemy attack. His crew speaks of him with reverence for decades. Historians compare his attack to the charge of the Light Brigade, except Evans achieved what the Light Brigade never did. He succeeded. To this day, naval officers study his decisions as a model of battlefield audacity. And among the survivors of Taffy 3, the memory never fades. They gather at reunions. They speak of Evans as a legend. They remember how a man from Pawnee, Oklahoma, half Cherokee and fiercely proud, led them into a battle they could not win and turned it into a victory no one could explain. Even the Japanese acknowledged it. Admiral Kurita himself, after the war, admitted he believed he faced the entire U.S. Third Fleet because of how fiercely Taffy 3 fought. The smallest force created the greatest illusion, and that illusion saved the Philippines. Why does this story matter now? Because it reminds us that victory is not always achieved by strength, speed, or size. Sometimes it emerges from resolve, sometimes from leadership, sometimes from ordinary men refusing to act like ordinary men when history turns to look at them. You do not need heavy armor to stand your ground. You do not need a powerful engine to charge into danger. You do not need a mighty ship to change the fate of a war. You need courage, you need conviction, you need someone like Evans, and you need a crew willing to follow him. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that Commander Ernest E. Evans and the 327 men of USS Johnston do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.